What's up guys, and welcome back to the channel. In today's video we have a really fun and pretty extensive installation for the Nissan GT-R. So in today's video we are going to be installing a set of lowering springs. So we're going to be dropping the GT-R by about a ½ inch and hopefully improving the ride quality a little bit. So Maddie, why don't we show them what we got? So we got a set of H&R lowering springs. So we have one of them right here and then the other one for the rear sitting right here. So the reason why I went with the H&R springs is because on my Toyota Supra, that's exactly what I installed on that car. And I had them on it for 2 years. Ride quality was so much better than stock. It dropped at the perfect ride height and it just handled so much sharper. Now the GT-R actually handles really well, even with the weight of the car. In race mode, the suspension is awesome, very stiff for the performance driving, and then in comfort mode, it's really comfortable. So with the 3 modes in the suspension, I didn't want to replace that and do full coilovers. I still wanted to retain that, so that's why I went with the lowering springs. And because I like them on the Supra, I went with the same brand. Now I ordered these from Fitment Industries and they literally have everything you need for suspension and wheels for cars. They have a ton of different brands, the lowering springs, coilovers, air ride suspension, and wheels. So anything you need, be sure to check out Fitment Industries. I'll have their website down below along with their Instagram. Definitely give them a follow. All right, so first and foremost, I'm gonna go ahead and measure the wheel gap and basically the clearance in the stock configuration. So the fender is right under 28 inches up front. And then moving to the back, it looks like we are just under 28.5 inches all around. So it'll be exciting to see with the lowering springs if we do get that ½ inch drop all around. Next up, we gotta get the interior out. So as you just saw from the time lapse, I went ahead and did that yesterday just to get that out of the way. But basically all of this has to come out just to get to the bolts that are on the top of the rear struts, which are on that upper deck lid. Pretty straightforward, quite honestly. This really isn't that much work, even though it does take you about an hour, and we stripped the entire interior. The hardest part I actually found was removing the big surround for the subwoofer. You may have noticed that on the time lapse. I'll play those frames real quick. I had to pull out quite a lot and I ended up flying into the back of the seat. So that was definitely pretty fun. So with that done, now let's lift up the rear and start removing it. Alright, so the next step is removing the upper bolts now for the rear shocks. So all this work back here just to get to the 3 bolts right here. So I'm just using a standard extension and these are 12mm bolts. And then from here use a flathead and we have the controller right here for the electronic suspension. We just got to pop that tab off and we can unplug this. And then from there, we're just using a 17mm. And then we're gonna give it a little bit of pressure just to pop off the strut from the control arm. And then with the rears all out of the car, I went ahead and assembled this side just to get my bearings with it. You can see everything all nicely and done. Not really much of a difference in look aside from the color of the spring. And then the 2 springs side by side. The H&R is slightly shorter, of course, being a lowering spring, and then I'm sure it's a little bit stiffer as well. Very straightforward to do. The biggest tool you're gonna need is a spring compressor. I went ahead and bought this the other day. I ordered it on Amazon. I'll have it linked down below. And one thing I really like, you can actually put the bit driver right in there or use a socket. So I found that to be very helpful. So we'll just do the spring compressor and start getting this disassembled. So from there, you're gonna want a socket that has a hole in it. I'll have one of these linked on Amazon as well. Really good tool. So we can just slide the cable through the tool. And then with a little bit of assistance from a bar and just standing on it, we can loosen this bolt. All right, the other side was a lot easier to get off. So when in doubt, get some leverage. All right, there we go. All right, so there is the whole shock with the cable. And then to get these spring compressors off, we just loosen them carefully, one at a time, and we'll get this thing all the way off. So from there, I'm just gonna go ahead and clean where the spring is gonna sit. Car is 42,000 miles, obviously it's almost a decade old. So we just got some dirt here. It looks like the shock absorbers, the bilge tines are still in pretty good shape. There's just a little bit of dirt and grease on here, but nothing's leaking or anything. So still in pretty good shape for being an aged car, but we'll clean these things up. So now on to the reinstallation. One thing I'm gonna do, because this whole piece is one piece and we have to get this soft cable through it and through a tiny little hole to obviously put it all together and then put this nut on. So what I'm gonna do, take some electrical tape and just cut it to a few inches. And I found a chopstick. So if you have a chopstick, you know, wooden skewer, metal skewer, and we're just gonna tape it onto the front here to where it can kind of have some way to actually point this all the way through, because it's kind of tight. But we'll just put everything through the spring and get this assembled. And we'll just let it sit like this for right now, using that chopstick method, and we can fish it through and get it through that whole way down there. And it'll come out, and we can just pull it all the way through and get this reassembled. There is a little notch you're gonna wanna line up from the center piston and this area up top. And then all you wanna do is line up where this is gonna be sitting in the cradle area. And then same with the top piece. I'm gonna rotate this back to where it was in the factory setting. That way everything is pretty much normal. And with a little bit of pressure, we can push this down and tighten it all back together. So now onto the reinstallation of these rear shocks. One thing I learned by doing the other side, once you've got all this put back together like you've already seen, I went ahead and loosened this upper bolt like 2 turns, because I did have to spin the lower portion of the shock to get it all lined up, and I didn't want to do that all tight because I don't want extra pressure on anything. So make sure you loosen that before you put it back in. And then once this was in the car, I went ahead and further loosened it all the way so I could rotate this all the way. So with all that said, we're back to using the chopstick method, because we have to fish this cable, which is obviously very flimsy, all the way up through into this hole up top, which is really hard to do, and you have no access. So you definitely need something that is longer like that to where you can feed it through. So I'm just gonna take the tape again, and we will just tape that all together. So from there, I can slowly fish this all the way back up from this back side. And I'll use a sway bar to kind of rest it for a second, and then take this chopstick right here, and we're just gonna look straight up and poke it through the upper hole to where we can at least get this up. So from there, I can continue lifting up the strut, just kind of rest it on from the sway bar to a control arm to then the axle, just to at least get it up there. All right, so that is technically in there. So with that center bolt all the way back to loose up top of this, and the 3 strut bolts all nice and tight, it gives me better access to actually push this whole assembly down and rotate this into place. All right, so the front end is now lifted up, got the wheels off and everything. Like on the other side, I already went ahead and did the other side just to get my bearings with it. Pretty straightforward, once again, like I found in the rear. So we have a few bolts back here. So we're gonna use a 12mm on this brake line real quick, and we'll get this one off. and then move to the brake lines themselves and just get them off of the little brackets. There's two back here, one up top, and then one in the lower side. That way we have a lot of clearance for everything to wiggle around. So then we're going to take a 17mm on the swaybar end link, and then the same one on the lower portion of the shock right there. And then a 14mm bolt will get the upper control arm bolt out. So with those out, you're gonna pull up this rubber piece and get this kind of gasket thing with these cables up a little bit. And then we can work on following this cord all the way to the back here, which is of course the suspension. And then we're just gonna kind of hold it and push this out. And there we go, so that is out. And then now we can kind of pull this out of the way, and I'll slowly let this jack down. We can lower the lower control arm a little bit. So then to get this front strut out, it's a little tricky. Basically push down the lower control arm, and at some point you are going to want to push up on the upper control arm, and then you want to make the top of the strut come towards the front of the car, and then the underside of the strut, you kind of got to get it off the control arm and wrap it around the axle, and that's how you can actually get enough room to roll it forward and get it out of the way. There, almost brake line. There we go. And with one of the fronts done and out of the way, I did have to use the spring compressor to actually reinstall this upper bolt. So it took a little bit extra time. So let's hurry up and get this one done. All right, so we are done with one. It is reinstalled on the passenger side, and the driver's side is all reinstalled back together. So one thing you need to know, which we had a little bit of troubleshooting on the other side, when you take this apart, before you actually take this stock spring off, keep in mind where exactly this bolt is in reference to something like this sticker, like the Bilstein logo or something. Because if this is twisted, if this bolt is over here, it's not going to go in, because this, of course, has to be parallel with the car. You're going to want to have a bolt perfectly in line, and then it should go in smoothly. Alright, so it's been around 7 or 8 hours. The GTR is done. To be quite honest, that was a very straightforward installation. There was nothing too challenging. All the bolts came out nicely. I wouldn't say there were any crazy hiccups, but honestly pretty straightforward and kind of fun to do. I enjoyed this project a lot. So now I'm going to go ahead and tape measure this and see what we're looking at. The car's only been sitting like this for an hour or so, so they might still need to settle. So right now we're about a 1/4 inch under 28. So that's a 1/4 inch drop as of now. And then in back, we're just a little bit above 28. So these have been sitting longer, so this is closer to a 1/2 inch drop right now. The front probably still needs to settle. By the time this video goes live, I'll go ahead and update those numbers to have the better measurements once everything is settled. But that's it. Now let's see if I can get out of the driveway, and then we'll wrap it up. All right, so we're gonna see the driveway test just to see how everything looks. And hopefully don't really scrape or anything. So front bumper cleared it fine. So now this is the sketchy part. Woo, we are so close, but we are good. Yeah, we're clear. All right, so we can still visit the parents when needed and clear decent things. All right, let's hear this thing. All right. All right, guys, and that is it. The lowering springs are installed on the Nissan GT-R. And then once again, big shout out to Fitment Industries. I'll have them linked down below. They literally have everything you need for any car. Lowering springs, coilovers, air ride, wheels, tires. So they will definitely hook it up. As far as the GT-R goes, I'm excited to feel it out and see what it's like now with the new setup. I'm gonna get an alignment done and then make another video where I really talk about how the car performs, because when I had the Supra, the H&R springs made such a big difference. That car lowered at 1 inch and it just rode so much better. It was so much more stable and better in the turns, so I was really impressed with them. So hopefully the GT-R gets the same thing. Being a little bit heavier car, this does have some weight you gotta throw around, so it'll be interesting to see. But there is a good look as the sun is fading away. So far looking pretty good. I'm excited to see them settle just a little bit more. But there's another look at it real quick. GT-R looks so good on the Vossen HF5s. Loving this car. So anyways, that's it for today's video. If you enjoyed it, give it a thumbs up, smash that subscribe button. I'll see you guys next video.